fond of our pet goldfish. Our God could only love us because we are brought into the mystery of equality in the life of the Trinity. So this is a doctrine that we can only share with people with a vast sense of their dignity, in conversation with them. The doctrine of the Trinity can only be shared, as I argued in my latest book, What's the Point of Being a Christian?, which you're all going to buy. Don't have to read it, just buy it, please. The doctrine of the Trinity can only be shared in conversation, because the Trinity is the eternal, equal, loving conversation of the Father and the Son in the Holy Spirit. One of my brethren, Herbert McCabe, with whom I lived for 30 years, he compared our entry into the life of the Trinity with a kid listening to the intelligent conversation of 3 or 4 adults in a pub, probably in Dublin. Herbert said, think for a moment of a group of intelligent adults relaxing together in one of those conversations that have really taken off. They're being witty, responding to each other, what in Ireland they call the crack. Serious ideas may be at issue, but no one is being serious. No one is being pompous or solemn. Nobody's preaching. There are flights of fantasy. There are jokes and puns and irony and mimicry and disrespect and self-parody. Now, says Herbert, that child is like us entering the life of the Trinity. And that's why God became human in a man of conversation. If you look at Jesus in John's Gospel, it's just one conversation after another. The conversation with the disciples, with the Samaritan woman at the well, conversation with the man born blind. Everybody else talks about him, but Jesus talks to him. The last discourse, one last great conversation, the conversation with Pontius Pilate, which ends with the silence of death. And what's the resurrection? The resurrection is the resumption of the conversation with Mary Magdalene in the garden and the disciples. That's why we cannot preach the doctrine of the Trinity in any other way except for in mutual, equal, respectful, loving conversation with those with whom we disagree often. Now, there is some nervousness in the church about equating preaching and conversation. In the Church of England, which I know well, there is a terrible argument at this moment about whether we should preach to the Muslims or have dialogue with them. In our own church, the Synod of Asia, when the lineamenta were produced by the Vatican in preparation for the Synod, there were great reservations expressed about dialogue. If you opt for dialogue unambiguously, then you can easily slip, they said, into relativism. You know, any religion is the same as any other. They're all equal. But I believe, as the Asian bishops strongly asserted, that this is a wrong dichotomy. Because you can only communicate the doctrine of the Trinity in conversation. Otherwise, it would be rather like trying to convince people to be pacifists by beating them up. The medium is the message. Of course, no true conversation happens without conversion. They are the same word, more or less. If you have a real conversation with anybody else, it is in the hope that you will both be converted, but in ways that you cannot anticipate. If I take the example of my brother Pierre Claverie, we talked about him in prison yesterday, Norfolk prison. Pierre, the Bishop of Oran, one of our brethren in Algeria, he devoted his whole life to dialogue with Islam. And the first thing he hoped would be for his own conversion, that he may learn to see Christ's face in his Muslim brothers and sisters. He also hoped for their conversion. For some, it took the form of their conversion to Christianity. In others, it took the form of their conversion to being better Muslims. That's in God's hands. There's always conversion, but it is God who decides what form it will take. I was present for Pierre's funeral after he was assassinated by bombs. At the end of Mass, various people stood up to give their witness, and there was a young woman. She stood up and she said, "Pierre brought me back to Islam. He was my bishop. He was the bishop of the Muslims too." And there was this roar of sound in the whole cathedral, 1,000 people, nearly all of whom were Muslim. And when I asked, what are they saying? They were all saying, he was the bishop of the Muslims. Now that's conversion. It's not the conversion that you might expect. So if the church is to be alive, if the doctrine of the Trinity, which is central, is to be vital, then we have to be open to dialogue with our contemporaries, even if they're not Christians. You have to read the novels that best explore the nature, the joy, the pain of love. I think Niall Williams, if you want to be let into a little secret, Niall Williams, an Irish novelist, is one of the great explorers of the nature of love. If I want to understand the Trinity, one of the things I do is I read his novels. They help me to see what is an equal, respectful, mutual love. When I was on the plane, sorry, you see how jet lagged I am. When I was on the plane from London to Sydney, I saw a wonderful film which many of you may have seen, Children of a Lesser God. Have you seen it? It's the story of a man who goes to work in a deaf school. And he falls in love with this beautiful young woman who's deaf. And finally, she reveals to him the challenge of loving. She signs to him, which I can't do. It is only if you let me be an I, as I am an I, that I will be able to let you into my silence, so that you may know me. And I thought, that's it. I leapt up from my seat in the plane. I rushed. I found a stewardess. I said, give me some ink, give me some paper. I'll write that down. Tears pouring down my eyes, you know. She probably thought, oh, another drunk nutter, you know. So we see how doctrine is alive in dialogue. When Aristotle, or many part of Aristotle's corpus of work was rediscovered in the 13th century, many people were afraid of Aristotle. He's too pagan, you know. He's down to earth. He isn't celestial like Plato, you know. He was a marine biologist, not Christian. But Aquinas leapt on him and found in him an inspiration for a whole new revitalization of Christian morality, ethics. So we have to ask the question. I put it to you. Don't put it back to me then. Who are the Aristotles that we need to listen to these days? And that brings me naturally to the second area I want to look at, where you have a really dynamic interaction between Christianity and society, and that is in morality. Go and teach them all that I have taught you, all the commandments I have given you. Here you see even more acutely the challenge of neither retreating into the ghetto nor disappearing down the plug hole of assimilation.